Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today I brought in a special guest, my good friend Globku. How are you doing, Globku?
Terrific. Thank you for having me. We're gonna be talking some Scarlet Nexus.
Yeah. So you've already played it. You finished it. You finished it a little bit before I did. I only finished it like 2 days ago. And
you finished both?
No. I only finished with Yuito. For those of you that don't know anything about Scarlet Nexus, we'll do like a quick intro. This is an action RPG with a lot of JRPG elements. That's kind of like the way that I've been describing it. The closest thing that I can remember the Scarlet Nexus would be Astral Chain. I don't know if you played Astral Chain.
Yep. I remember that. I remember liking it a lot, but also feeling like it was a little bit repetitive, like a lot of the areas were sort of samey. But I remember it having a ton of post-game content as well.
Yeah, but both these games, interestingly enough, you have two protagonists that you can choose from.
More or less. I remember Astral Chain was sort of like, yeah, you choose a male or a female, but this one is actually two different characters.
This one is different. I was just saying, like, you do get two protagonists. And it's like in Astral Chain, one just replaces the other. So like if you play the female, then the male would show up in the places where the female would show up if you were to play the male. And Scarlet Nexus is different because it's not a different story, but it's like two different perspectives of the same story. That's what I would argue, right? So it's like at some points in the Yuito story, you will see things where it's like, oh, so Kasane, who is the other protagonist, she would be off doing something else. And if you go through the Kasane story, you would be doing the something else while Yuito is doing his own thing. And it gives you more context to the main story as well. So it is kind of like recommended that you play both of them. Did you play both of them all the way by now?
I'm like halfway through the second playthrough. I played basically enough Kasane to understand how different the two stories would be before I put out the review. And I've been working towards the platinum trophy. That's what I'm doing right now.
So you really, really, really enjoyed Scarlet Nexus if you're working towards a platinum, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it has its issues, and we'll talk about them for sure. But overall, I really like Scarlet Nexus. Absolutely. I think it's and I think it's mostly carried by the story, which is a thing that is very hard to talk about.
Yeah,
because obviously you don't want to spoil anything.
We're not going to be talking about spoilers at all in this video, so there's no concerns there.
But how do you sell a game, or how do you review a game that you enjoyed mostly because of the story when you can't talk about much of what happens in it? Basically, what I said in the review is like, you're not ready for where the story is going. You're not ready for the twist. You're not ready for the dimension that it has. Like this story is kind of amazing. And it's funny because I put out the review and basically every review outlet was saying the opposite. They were saying gameplay is cool, but the story gets in the way. I really don't know how this game works without the story that it has, because without it, it just feels like sort of a mediocre hack and slash action game. And I think the story is really what elevates it to the next level. But apparently every other review outlet disagrees.
So that's it. I'm actually a little bit in the middle of that. Like, I think that the hack and slash is not just mediocre. Like, I really, really enjoyed the combat. I thought it was very satisfying. But before we get into all of that stuff, I want to try and follow a structure that I tend to do, which is visual, sound, story, and then we go into the gameplay. Now, the story section is going to be...
shackles. Remove my shackles. I hate the structure. Okay, let's do it.
So, visual-wise, I know that you only played it in 1080p because you still don't have a 4K monitor by now, or have you received it at this point?
No, I still don't have it, and it really hurts me. Okay, Ray?
Dude, it's so insane nowadays that you can't get anything when it comes to like computers. Almost, it's crazy. Like I have a cousin of mine that's trying to buy a PC, and I'm like, nah, dude, forget about it. Not now.
And the monitor industry still hasn't caught up with the new consoles. Like, this is when the consoles came out, I said this is the worst time to buy a new monitor because people are working on the technology for the next monitors. Basically, you cannot get a 4K monitor that does 120 hertz, has HDR, and 1 millisecond delay, which is the goal of having a monitor over a TV is that 1 millisecond delay, which if you play a lot of fighting games like me is a necessity. And like there are a couple, one of them came out last month. It's sold out everywhere. Asus is putting out another one this month, but it's been impossible to
It's been completely insane to get anything electronic nowadays. I mean, even PlayStation 5s just or Xbox One X, not one Xbox Series X's, they're just like completely crazy when it comes to that stuff. But so you played at 1080p. I played it on the PS5. I don't think it runs native 4K. Unfortunately, I don't have the tools of like Digital Foundry, so there is no way to know because PlayStation 5 outputs two signals, 1080p and 4K, and that's it. Even if the game is running like on a lower native resolution like 1440p, which I suspect is what Scarlet Nexus might be running or somewhere along those lines, you can't really tell. But basically the visuals look real good. And the game still runs at steady 60 throughout the gameplay. I haven't noticed any drops on the PlayStation 5 version. Did you play PS5? You played PS5 as well, right?
Yeah, I played PS5 as well.
Yeah, so on your end, I highly doubt you would see any drops either. You just like solid 60.
Solid 60, but yeah, I was playing 1080p.
So the art style I really liked. It's got the cell shading that a lot of anime games have, which by the way is one of the reasons I invited Globku. Like if you check out his channel, which you should, I'll put links in the description, all that stuff. He's like the anime games master of YouTube. Okay, nobody does anime games coverage as well as Globku, so there you go. Just to let you guys know. But what'd you think about the art style?
I think when it comes to character models and stuff like that, it's one of the best looking anime games I've ever seen. It really is. It is. Every character is gorgeous to look at. That not every background is stunning. Some of them are really well designed. I definitely paused here and there to look at the vistas, but for the most part, like backgrounds are something that give you some variety. They make you feel like you're in a different place, but they're nothing to write home about.
Yeah.
But the characters themselves, like every time a character is on screen, it's insane how good they look. And they do some really interesting stuff with lighting and how that light reflects on those characters, which makes it have its own vibe and looks gorgeous. It really does.
I actually had that lighting glitch on me once, which I thought was really weird because this happened once, so it's not a big deal at all. I just thought it was really funny because I changed Yuito's armor to red. Both of us, by the way, I forgot the disclosure at the start. Both of us got the game from Bandai Namco. But so because we got that version, was the deluxe version, whatever, and that comes with the red suits. So you can change the suit of your character to red. Now I changed mine to red, and all of a sudden it became pink, like permanently, because the brain drive thing activated, and it never deactivated the visual effect of brain drive. And I was like, "What is going on with my character? Why is he pink all of a sudden?" And it never. I didn't even. It was at that point where brain drive had just became available, which changes the colors of your character, and I didn't even realize it just became pink. And then eventually I reloaded the save and I was like, okay, it was a glitch, fine. But
interesting.
Yeah, it does cool lighting stuff whenever you engage some of the more combat stuff, particularly when you go into brain field, which we'll talk about in gameplay. Like you just get all black backgrounds and just almost like thermal vision. It's completely insane and overwhelming in really good ways. So visual wise, I was super happy about it. I think it looks real good. I think the animations are also very good. Not sure if you agree with that or not.
Yeah. The game does do a lot of like visual novel style cutscenes to tell its story, but it has a ton of CG cutscenes, and the animation work on those is top notch. It's like top of the industry for sure.
Yeah. The cinematics I was a little bit mixed on. I wish there was more of the in-game cutscenes and less of the comic stuff that they do with the JRPG. And I think that was a big complaint because I streamed a big portion of the game on Twitch, and a lot of people were like, I'm not into the whole visual novel style that they're going for. I was like, it doesn't bother me because I've played a lot of JRPGs, but I can understand that for someone who's just looking for the action part of the game, the amount of like cutscenes that you get in terms of, you know, storytelling and all that stuff in that JRPG format is completely overwhelming.
I understand that for sure. I think it's not fair to ask for more in-game cutscenes because there really are a ton of them, and we're talking about, I don't know, 40 hours of story, something like that, where you just can't make like that. That's a budget that's unrealistic to expect if you want to animate that entire thing. So that's the solution that they found to, I guess, keep it in budget. I can't think of a game that does that much story without doing some sort of trick like that. Sometimes it's just, you know, two models and there's a dialogue and they're barely animating and doing stuff, you know, in other games like that. That's how they would solve that issue instead of everything's a cutscene. This is the solution that they found. Like they made sort of a dynamic visual novel style thing. You have the portraits talking to each other, but you also have a background scene that keeps changing. They slide and change stuff all the time. Like it, as far as visual novels go, it's a style that I appreciate for sure. And I'm not a big fan of visual novels, by the way. Like that didn't really bother me that much. But maybe I'm coming from a different background.
Yeah, but it's like to me, I'm not saying it bothered me. I'm saying I've had a lot of people that, you know, were commenting on that because to me it was like whatever. I do feel like when we get the story, I want to do a couple of comments on that, but in regards to like the cinematics themselves and whatnot, I think it was fine. Like again, I would like more in-game ones, but like you said, it is one of those things where you'd need a much bigger budget for something like that. And then on the final touch on the visuals, I'd like to bring up the UI, which I feel is at times a little bit overwhelming. Because like okay. you look around the scenery, right, and you have the level, and then the level is just chock full of neon stuff all over the place, which are they call them the visions or whatever. And there's just so much of that. And then on top of that, there's all of the things that you can throw at monsters and the L2s and the R2s. And sometimes it's hard to keep track of where everything is, even when you're in the middle of a fight and you're trying to figure out where's the L2 thing that I want to use to do the big attack on the monster? Where's just something that I can throw? It can get a little bit hectic, particularly with the camera lock-on system, which is probably my biggest complaint in the whole game.
Really? I actually like the camera lock-on system.
Dude,
wow.
It is... Oh my god!
Because like I feel like I can lock on to a target, but I still have free control of the camera, so I can look at the objects and throw them. I feel like the game gave me that freedom.
I got thrown around so often because I was trying to swap targets, and you have to press R1 and the right stick in certain directions, and I thought it was insane. And a lot of times, particularly in the later fights where they give you monsters, because I was playing on hard, right? And they give you monsters that will actually hit you really hard. And keeping track of all of them while you're also trying to lock on and focus on one, it was insane. So I ended up cheesing the game a little bit with some of the tools that they give you, which we'll talk about on gameplay. But yeah, I thought that the camera controls were not good.
Yeah, the game has camera issues. The camera issues are very common to other 3D action games. It's something that everyone that played a 3D action game will be familiar with. I don't think they happen all the time. But it's there. It's there for sure. And regarding the visual clutter, that's something that I really felt pre-release when they announced the game. Whenever they showed gameplay before I actually got to play it myself, it was so hard to understand what was happening.
Yeah.
Getting your hands on it clarifies a lot of that stuff.
Yes.
Like your brain somehow starts distinguishing, okay, this part is not important for now. I can focus on these icons jumping around, which are the things that I can throw. Like your brain does that exercise for you. That said, yes, there are moments there. It can still get super chaotic. Absolutely, I agree.
But that's visuals. Overall, I still think that both of us have, I'm super positive about the visuals. I think they look real good. And I think they did a really good job, particularly as This I feel is probably the same team that kind of worked on stuff like Code Vein and God Eater 3, which were.
I don't think it is.
I think that at least part of that team also worked on this game. Not exactly the same team, because you see the themes of like, the black and red theme that you see in here, you see it in Code Vein, and you see it in God Eater 3, like perpetuated all over the game, like just straight up. That's one of the things. Like, I know that a big portion of the team worked on like Tales of Arise, not Tales of Arise, Tales of games, at least. So yeah, I did some background check on them because I was curious, but yeah, it's Bandai Namco Studios, and I think that.
And look, if you've played a Tales game, this is a Tales game. Structurally, it is a Tales game
with better combat, I would argue.
Yeah. The action is different, but yeah, 100%.
Yeah. But it's like if you've played, for instance, God Eater 3 or Code Vein, one of my biggest complaints in both of those games would be a feeling of lack of impact in your attacks. Like your attacks would connect, but I feel like the impact didn't really convey that properly. And in this game, I feel like they nailed that. Like you throw a car into a monster, you feel that, and it feels good. You throw a train into a monster, it feels fantastic. So like whenever you throw stuff, whenever you're hitting stuff, there's good feedback both on at least on the controller, because it also uses a little bit of haptics. So there's good feedback on the controller as well as on the screen. And I thought that they kind of like nailed impact, which is something that I feel like Bandai Namco teams sometimes struggle to get right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the slowdowns, isn't it? Like when you throw something, it slows down right before the moment of impact and then speeds back up to normal. It's really well done.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They did a fantastic job. So let's move on to sounds. I don't have a whole lot to say about sound effects themselves. I think they sound pretty good. I particularly like the shattering sounds whenever you break a monster's gauge. It just feels good. And then you could do the brain bursts where you just like rip the monster's brain open and it shatters, and all of that stuff sounds great. The hits with the katana sound good as well. Mm-hmm. So on that department, I just think they did a really good job overall.
Is this where you talk about voice acting as well?
Voice acting and soundtrack. I was going to go soundtrack, and then voice acting. Okay. So sounds, you got nothing to say, just good?
Sound-wise, yeah, pretty much agree. It's fine.
Soundtrack I thought was excellent.
Yeah. Love that soundtrack. I'm listening to that soundtrack out of the game. It's that good. It's really awesome.
It's one of those things that I just really like it when developers bring the soundtrack to the forefront, which not a lot of games do. They usually let the soundtrack just like as background, ambience, whatever. In this game, they bring it to the forefront, and it dynamically changes depending on what's happening, depending on the state of your character. Like if your character's normal, you get the normal soundtrack. If your character gets brain drive, you get a different sound. You get like they mix up the sounds a little bit to let you know that you're in brain drive, and then if you go into brain field, then it just completely changes to a different soundtrack that's exclusive to brain field. I thought it was really, really cool. I love how dynamic it was, and I just love the tracks themselves.
Yeah. There are a few that go a little bit too far in the dubstep realm that I didn't really like. And there are a few that feel like they loop a bit too fast. So they get a bit tedious if you stay in an area for too long. Like if you're doing a lot of exploration or stuff like that, some of them can get old. But like I said, I'm listening to the soundtrack off game. So that's how much I liked it. Yeah.
And we'll definitely have to talk about staying too long in an area as well for the video, because there's a little bit of that. But you wanted to talk about voice acting. So my take on voice acting is like, I would prefer to play the whole game in Japanese if I could.
Me too.
I tried playing the whole game in Japanese, and it was hard.
It's so hard
because there's portions during the gameplay where characters will speak. And you're engaged in this combat that requires a lot of your attention to like do perfect dodges and throw things and use special attacks and whatnot. And you can't just like, let me just not pay attention to what's going on in combat so that I can read what this character is saying. You can't do that.
It's a game where the story never stops, especially during boss fights. Characters will be talking to you. You will be replying, and you can't really just read the subtitle while you're in the middle of the action. So like playing in Japanese, I tried it, but like I wasn't following the story at that point, so I had to change it.
Yeah. So the The voice acting in Japanese is excellent. I thought it was really good. The voice acting in English, here's the interesting thing. I don't think that the voice acting in English is bad. I think that the localization team didn't really do a particularly good job of like, they did a translation, right? They translated Japanese to English, but they didn't localize it, if you know what I mean. So it's like, you get a lot of those things that only really work in Japanese, but said in English where it's just like, okay. Like the over-reliance on, I'm counting on you. Like nobody actually says that in English. Nobody says it. And I know that this is something that you get a lot in Japanese games, but sometimes when the localization is done a little bit better, they don't overuse that as much and they find different ways of conveying some of those Japanese things. And I think they could have done a better job, particularly with the writing and the localization aspects of it. But the voice actors, they do the best that they can with what they're given. At least that's...
This is not a jab at the voice actors themselves, but there is a tone that is very common whenever you translate a game from Japanese where it just feels so fake, Yeah. It just feels like, you're delivering this line, but it's not exactly English that you're speaking. It's not the English you're used to. And that, in a very long story, can get a bit tough to listen to. I was playing yesterday. Girlfriend was cooking. She was just listening to the game, and she said, "That's a Japanese game, isn't it?" Yeah. I can tell by the tone, because, and this is common to a lot of Japanese games that get translated to English. Like you hear this all the time. You probably heard it. I don't know. Persona kind of has something like this. I do think like the voice acting quality in Persona is a bit better. There are some voices that I straight up don't like in Scarlet Nexus.
Yeah,
but you gotta play it in English because like otherwise you'll just miss out.
Unless you can speak Japanese. If you can understand Japanese, then you should definitely play it in Japanese, and you'll have a better experience. Like one of the characters that to me was particularly annoying was I thought it was Tsukino. She plays the role of like the shy Japanese character. It's like, oh, Yuito.
Tsugumi?
Tsugumi? Oh, yeah. Right. Did I say Tsukino? I'm thinking about Monster Hunter Stories too. Okay. Yeah, Tsugumi. Tsugumi was it's like I get what they're going for, but it just doesn't work as well in English, I feel like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's voice acting, so you basically have to pick your poison. Either you get really good voice acting, but it's going to be harder to follow the story, or you get okay voice acting, but just following the story is easier.
Yeah, and the story is already hard enough to follow, so...
Yes, the story...
Go easy on yourself.
The story is extremely hard to follow, which is what we're going to be talking about now. No spoilers again. Just to set you guys up where the game kind of starts. You can pick between one of two protagonists, like we said. And these are two teenagers, essentially, that are joining this military force. I think it is a military force called the OSF, or the Other Suppression Force, which is this military branch of government that their whole thing is fighting against these creatures that have started appearing onto the world, and they're called Others. That's pretty much kind of like most of the information that you know. You know that this is in some, distant future, something like that, or an alternate future from our own timeline, and that there's these others that invade and they're trying to eat people's brains because our brains of most people in this world have a psionic hormone that gives them superpowers. And the others want to eat that.
The others just want to eat brains.
Yeah,
that's really all they want.
They want to eat brains. So this story, it starts slow, and in your first three phases, the first three phases of the game, because the game's like divided in phases, they're like chapters. You're just like, okay, so this is a typical JRPG. There's nothing special about it. This is what I was thinking when I was playing through the game. So this is typical JRPG. There's nothing special about this story. It's whatever. And then you get to that third phase.
Uh-huh.
And just like everything changes and you're like, wait, What? And then from that point onwards, the game is just like, I'm going to one-up this, and then I'm going to one-up it again, and again, and again, and again. But tell us a little bit about it.
I was losing my mind not being able to talk about the story with someone. I was like, dude, what are they doing? And like, they build up in such a way that it feels like this story is impossible to wrap up. This is impossible to finish. And somehow they do. Somehow they do stick the landing. I thought it was pretty okay. But like, yeah, the build up, the twists on the way there, it is so much bigger, so much crazier than anything I was expecting. And you're right. Yeah. The first 2 chapters, let's play a shonen anime story. Let's just, I'm a cadet, you know, I'm a recruit. I'm going to climb here the ranks and I'm going to get stronger. Find the boss man that makes the others. That's not what the story is. It is really not. And it's hard to talk about it. I think it uses some gimmicks that some people really don't like. I think there are people that have an issue with certain types of stories, but you can't say what type of story it is without spoiling.
Yeah.
So let's just say a lot of people don't like stories with dinosaurs, okay? Let's just say, hey, a bunch of dinosaurs are going to show up, but people generally don't like dinosaur stories because they're like, they always make the T-Rex the bad guy. But like, how do I tell you that the story has dinosaurs? I can't do that. So I don't know. I loved it, but how do you review a game and tell people why you think the story is good without saying what the story is?
And the interesting thing is that I hadn't really checked other reviews besides yours up until this point. And I find it interesting that you've checked reviews and people actually say that the story is getting in the way of the action combat. And I'm just like, I mean, the story is such a motivator. It started what?
It started with people leaving comments saying, well, everyone else says the story gets in the way, so this is kind of refreshing, or like, I don't know what to think anymore. Like, they're saying one thing and everyone else is saying the other thing. And here's what I read those reviews, and here's what I agree with on those reviews. The game has some pacing issues. 100%.
Yes.
Like, you are doing the action, you are doing the gameplay, and you're constantly interrupted by cutscenes. Yes, 100%. The story gets in the way of gameplay like that. The thing is, without that narrative, I don't think this game is as good.
It's not. I do think that there is, particularly closer to the end, because there's almost 2 stories that the game is telling. It's not 2 stories, actually multiple ones, because like it's telling you the story of the main plot, and then it's telling you the individual story of each of the characters through these things that they call bonding episodes, which in some of these JRPGs, this is where you go on a date with characters and you get to choose your waifu and all of that usual stuff. And this one, you don't really choose a waifu. The story is pretty linear. There are no choices that you actually do throughout the story. It's just like the story is what the story is. And throughout the story, they give you these moments which are intermissions. I forget the actual name that they give it. But
it's a great question.
Yeah, because I finished it like 2 days ago or whatever. But there's a standby phase. That's it. So they give you the standby phases, and the standby phases are specifically so that you go on these dates with these characters and whatnot. It's not just dates; it's like you basically hang out with the characters, and they're telling you the story of these characters. And one of the things that I noticed was that close to the end, something happens. I'm not gonna go into too much depth there, but basically the number of these bonding episodes that you have to do escalates immensely. To the point where, like, I would say that at the beginning of the game is like 60% cutscenes, 40% gameplay. At the end, it was like 20% gameplay and 80% cutscenes. And we're not talking about cutscenes for the main plot. This is, again, you can skip this. You don't have to do any of this stuff, but there are in-game advantages to doing it. Because, like, if you should do the bonding episodes, because you do level, like, you have a party and your party gives you stuff that is really awesome that we'll probably talk in gameplay. But you want to do them to level up that stuff that your teammates give you. But you can always just press start and skip the cutscene if you want. It's like, even if you are not interested in the bonding episodes, which I watched all of those that I unlocked, I watched all of them. It was hard, particularly at the end, Because I remember you saying something like in your review, you said, I played 25 hours on my first playthrough, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
My first
Yurito was 25
playthrough
hours.
took 35 hours.
Okay.
So I was like,
I
I don't
would
know
have
if,
taken longer too. Like there were a bunch of like gifts that I didn't get that I wanted to grind for. There were a bunch of side missions that I wanted to get, but like I have to put out a review. Like I'm not.
Yeah.
This is optional stuff. So like let's start with Kasane and see how different that is, because that's the last question that I have.
I did most of the presents, not all of them. I think I missed like 2 or 3. Because, you know, when I was getting closer to the end, I was like, I don't feel like grinding for this. Like, screw that. It's not even that it's not even that it's hard to go grind. It's just that you have so many of these bonding episodes to get through that you're just like, I want to get through these bonding episodes to get back to the main plot. And that's kind of
I'm
like
skipping them. I'm skipping them all on my second playthrough. I really am. Like I'm there for Kasane's perspective now. I'm there for Kasane's uniqueness to the story, her unique boss fights, unique areas that she visits. Like that's what I'm there for at this point. Like bonding episodes, there's a lot of character development in these bonding episodes, and it's not bad. Some characters are better than others.
Depends on the character. Yeah, some characters are very interesting. Like I thought what was his name? Luca. I thought Luca was interesting.
Luca was interesting. He does linger a bit too much on the same topic.
Yes,
yeah.
He lingers. But that's something that happens with all characters. Like Sugumi is the same thing. Like she's a little bit interesting.
Yeah,
and
I thought Genma was badass. I love the Genma episode.
Genma is really cool. Gemma is really cool. Gemma is worth
Gemma is this guy that's like one day away from retirement, you know? It's like, I'm going to finish this job and I'm going to retire. And god damn it, just stuff keeps piling on. I guess I got to work one more day before I retire. So like, it's so good.
Gemma I thought was real cool, yeah.
Poor Gemma.
But yeah, and then there's I thought Arashi was cool as well, an interesting character, Arashi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like her too.
But, you know, and then there's others that are not as interesting. But, you know, picking and choosing between that, if you have to watch everything, you do get to a point, particularly, like I said, closer to the end, where it's overwhelming. And then after you finish the game, because, like, this is not a spoiler, but after you finish the game, you have to talk to each and every one of the characters for another bonding episode before you can see the final cutscene. And I was like, no, stop.
I think you can just skip that. I think you can just go straight to the character that advances it.
Yeah, you can skip it, but like, you know, there's bonding episodes there, and I was like, I want to see all of it, but at the same time, I was like, maybe I shouldn't have, because I think part of that burned me out a little bit near the end.
I think by the end of that story, I actually wanted to talk to everyone to understand it a little bit better because of how crazy it was. There were things that I just didn't understand, and talking to each one of them was like, oh, okay, I see how they do this.
There are still things that I don't understand about the story. We can't talk about them because they're really there's this one thing that's really, really specific, but there, you know, I went through all of this, and at the end, there's still like one lingering question in my mind: how did this specific thing happen that I didn't quite get? But,
do you want to mute yourself and ask?
We'll talk about after recording the video because we don't want to spoil it for people. But yeah, that's the story. The story is one of those things that, like we said, it's not going to be for everyone. But I thought overall the story was really good. The main plot, particularly. Some of the bonding episodes, not so great. Other bonding episodes are okay. Problem is you have to go through all of them to figure out which ones are good, which ones are bad. But yeah, that's kind of like the story. And I do feel that near the end, that's my biggest criticism of the story, is that near the end, there's too many bonding episodes. Too much. You get completely overwhelmed with bonding episodes.
Mm-hmm. I will say also, like, playing the story through the story with Yuito and Kasane, you can pick the order, whatever you'd like. And it's kind of crazy how different they are. Because like throughout the story, you're playing as Yuito, you end up seeing Kasane as somewhat of a villain very early on. Like, you don't understand what she's doing, but she's also her own protagonist. And once you play as her, like, it makes total sense. I mean, they meet up later in the game. They tell each other what they've been up to. But even as I was playing as Yuito, And Kasane told me, "Oh, here's what happened." I was like, "I'm sorry, what? No,
Yeah, exactly.
I need to see that. Like, you telling me what happened is not gonna do it. I need to play the what you're saying happened."
And did it make more sense?
it's that
Because
crazy.
like I felt the same way. You know, some of the stuff that happens in the story, I was just like, I still don't like what happened at this point, despite you explaining to me why you were doing what you were doing. Does it get better if you actually experience it through her eyes?
I don't know. I didn't feel that particular.
Yeah.
No. I guess I don't know. Like, it gets clearer. Yeah. Because like, yeah, you're playing the game with her as a protagonist, and it sort of makes sense, the journey she goes through. And yeah, even like reveals about the entire nature of the world happen at a completely different pace. Like, there's stuff that happens early on with Kasane that Yuito doesn't see until like 10 hours in. And
Yeah.
it's crazy to like live that story with that knowledge that early on. When you played the other perspective, and you were like, I had no idea about this for the longest time. So yeah, it's very well built in that regard too. Like, each character has their own twists and turns. Even after you play with one character, the other one will still have their twists, and that's fun.
Yeah. So let's move on to gameplay. And the gameplay sections of the game, they're pretty straightforward. It's usually like, go through this level, beat the crap out of everything that you find using the combat system, and then get some more cutscenes. Usually most levels will have like a big boss at the end for you to fight. So let's start by talking about the combat, which is it's fairly basic early on, but they start piling on mechanics on top of mechanics on top of mechanics. And I thought that by the end, it was very interesting. Like, you called it a mediocre combat. I thought that by the end, it was actually a very good combat system with, again, the exception for me was the camera lock-on. I hated the camera lock-on. Felt like I was fighting the camera and the lock-on a lot of the fights. But if I was not fighting the camera lock-on, I found the combat to be tremendously satisfying.
Mm-hmm. I call it a mediocre hack and slash. I think the combat's actually really good. I think they've built a really good combat system. They hide most of the good combat system behind the talent tree. You're so limited at the start. Like, it feels clunky to play. It feels like nothing combos into anything. Like, even though like you have 2 attack buttons plus the button to throw objects, and you can mostly combo stuff. Like, you can be attacking, press the throw button, the character will jump back and throw the object with psychokinetic powers. But like, you do that once, and then your character stops because there's nothing else you can do until you unlock more talents in the talent tree, and you can keep your combo chaining. You go into the air as Yuito, and you do 2 attacks, and you watch your character slowly fall back down to the ground because you have nothing else. You don't have an attack that like smashes the opponent back down to the ground. All that stuff is locked behind the talent tree. And like, the talent tree feels like it's obligatory to make that combat fun. Like, it feels like they locked even basic things behind that talent tree, which is something that I didn't appreciate. But I think the game isn't that good of a hack and slash, and it's not because of the combat system itself. It's mostly because of the enemies. I don't think the enemies challenge you to use your entire kit. It feels like they have their weaknesses. Sometimes you have to pull an element to kill them faster, for sure. But for the most part, the same strategy that you do in the beginning of the game works at the end of the game. And I think that makes a good combat system not shine. And that's my main problem with it. Yeah. Even like you mentioned boss fights, but like, I feel like most boss fights were just bigger enemies with bigger health bars. They didn't have interesting mechanics to them. There are a few with interesting mechanics for sure, but they're so few and far between.
Yeah. So to give you guys a better idea on the combat system and the depth, like Globku was saying, you throw stuff to kind of like link your combos early on. So you go like 1, 2, I think it's just 3 combos at the start. You go 1, 2, 3, and then you throw something. And that's kind of like your combo finisher almost, and your character dodges, and he throws an item, assuming that there's an item for you to throw. Sometimes you are in places. It's very rare, but sometimes you will end up in a fight where there aren't actually things to throw, and that can actually be really frustrating, particularly if you invested points in the tree that throw stuff at enemies. But most of the times, there will be stuff for you to throw at enemies. Besides just throwing things, sometimes there are things in the scenario that you can throw, and usually throw is the right trigger, but there are sometimes things in the scenery that you can throw using the left trigger. Those are much more interesting. Like you'll find a bundle of barrels, and they will require like quick time inputs. So you throw this, and then you have to hold the left analog stick up, and he will like get the liquid from the barrels and then drop it onto the monster, and that will make monsters wet. For instance, if it's water. And then you can like use lightning to deal more stunning damage, or if it's oil, you can use fire to burn them. Mm-hmm. So that's just a simple example. There are more interesting things.
Every L2 item also has their unique QuickTime events. Like the QuickTime events are different for each type of item, which makes it really, keeps it varied. You don't feel like you're doing the same QuickTime events all the time. And there are some items that go kind of crazy.
Yeah, like
there are some L2 items that go kind of crazy.
Like the trains. The first time you just throw a train, it just feels so really good.
The bus is awesome. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You like to give you guys this. I think I showed this in my video of my early impressions of the game. But you ride a bus. He turns on the bus. He goes on top of the bus. You can drive the bus and run over monsters, and then when you're done, you press L2. I think it's L2, and he just like flips the bus on top of the next monsters, and it's brutally satisfying. Very, very, very satisfying. So, but that is just like
get all the XP at once. Just grind it.
But that's like the basics of like throwing things, because then there's also powers that you get from your teammates. So very early on, you get to use the powers of whoever is in your party. So like, for instance, if you're playing Yuito, you get Hanabi, who can enchant your sword with fire, and then you're dealing fire damage. That's just one of the very basic ones. Then later down the line, they also unlock other things which you can use to combo actions from the other characters. So you can actually summon one of the other characters to deal an additional attack, and you can combo that together with your own combos, and that also feels very good, particularly Gemma's Punch, because it breaks gauges a lot. And monsters also have a break gauge, which is something that you've seen in a lot of games nowadays. So if you deal a certain amount of damage, the monster will break, and then you can do an execution, which is a brain burst, which usually is a cool animation where it just rips out the monster's brain and blows it up. And then besides all that, there's brain drive, which increases your damage. So the better you do in combat, eventually you can enter brain drive. It'll increase your damage, increase your speed, increase the regeneration of using powers from other teammates.
I have a pet peeve with that. Like, it does it automatically. As soon as your meter is full, like, it just activates it. Like, you can't control it.
It is annoying.
Why?
Well, here's the way that you got to look at it, which is the way that I started looking at it, which is I'm going to put all things in the tree that trigger brain drive faster. And things that make
always have it.
and then things that make, there's one in there that makes brain drive regen your health whenever you activate brain drive. So I was like, just put everything into brain drive so that I get it as often as possible. But then there's another thing, which is after you engage brain drive, after brain drive phase ends, they give you access to something called a brain field, which is almost like in God of War when you go into the wrath of, what was it called? Wrath, I don't know. He goes into his wrath mode. Like it's even the same input. It's L3 and R3. And you just go like mega super Saiyan mode. You see the SCS cables coming out. And in that mode, you're just like a god. Basically, you destroy everything. You instead of using your weapon, you just use the items that you would usually throw, and you just melee with them. It just feels really good, particularly because that system is so busted that if you put the right talents, you're invulnerable.
Exactly.
While you're in brain drive, which was not brain drive, brain field, which was like one of the first things that I was like, oh, I can be invulnerable. This is great. But see, that's the thing. It's like you get
that can trigger a game over, by the way. I don't know if you got it. Like if you let it time out, it can trigger a game over. It can kill you.
Yeah, I saw that. So usually after the thing ends, I'll just exit out manually.
Yeah, you can exit out manually. I actually let it run. Like I wanted, like, is it gonna kill me? Is it actually gonna kill? It popped an achievement and everything. I'm like, cool, all right. I could actually game overs.
That's interesting. So yeah, you can kill yourself by going overboard. One of the really cool things about Brainfield, I thought, is that your character just goes insane with power. Like he actually starts screams, "Yes, I'll kill everyone!" It's just like
I never found an explanation for that. It feels so out of character. but like they both go nuts. They both become evil. But
Yeah.
it's just for that little moment. Then you end Brainfield and it's like, oh, we're back to normal.
Yeah, but it's the thing where they just get drunk with power. I guess that's the explanation, because you just get so powerful with it. I thought it was cool. I thought it was a neat touch. Like, I don't care too much about whatever justification they may or may not have for it, but I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I said is that I ended up because of so I played the whole game on hard. You said you switched through difficulties, right?
Yeah, you can switch anytime in the pause menu. Literally don't even have to restart the game.
So when would you swap difficulties during your playthrough?
Whenever it got too easy, I'd bump it up to hard. Whenever I thought, okay, this fight is boring, bump it down to normal.
Okay.
That's pretty much
Because
it.
there were a lot of situations where I was like, man, I should just put this difficulty down. This is insane. And
There were times that I was dying, but like if it was engaging, no, I would grind through it for sure. It's when no, you can't show this on camera. No, you can't show this on camera. You're not wearing underwear. It's not okay. No, there were times that like fights were hard, but it's engaging, so it's fine. But whenever it's like, okay, this guy just has a lot of health, and I don't have all day.
yeah,
Like there's a moment towards the end. Oh, you mentioned like towards the end it became like 80% cutscenes, but like that last level, like that goes way too long in gameplay. That goes way too long. Like you just what? Like they just throw every enemy you've ever fought. It's like, okay, you're just gonna go through this tower, and you're gonna keep fighting enemy after enemy after enemy, and it's like, dude, your combat is not that good to give me this long of a thing, and like there's no story there. It's literally like just fight everyone. Like that I bumped it down there because like that was annoying.
The last level wasn't even the worst one for me. The one before that was the worst one. That dungeon did not end. It's that dungeon that has a lot of like gray, a lot of chrome.
We might be
almost.
talking about the same thing. Yeah.
That wasn't the last dungeon. The last dungeon is the one that's all colorful and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, we're probably talking about the same one.
Yeah, that dungeon, which is the second to last dungeon, I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. Like, even my chat was going, because we were going through this dungeon for like what felt like 2 hours. The same dungeon.
It's a 2-hour dungeon.
Yeah,
it's a
so
2-hour dungeon.
and I there were people in my chat that like, oh, I got to take a break, and they left and came back, and they were like, you're still in this dungeon? Like, are you dying? And I'm just like, no, I haven't died yet. This is still just the same dungeon. It doesn't end. It's insane. Like, that dungeon was ridiculous. It was way too much. Even the one
It's
after
out of
that.
nowhere, like no other level is like that. But out of nowhere, it just felt like we needed 2 extra hours here. Just put all the enemies that you've already fought, and like you weren't getting anyone new. It was just like everyone you've already fought.
It's just execute, basically. It's basically for one of the enemies that they put in there that is new is the one that hides in the box that you can't kill it.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah,
not
so-
a new enemy for Kasane, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Because I played the demo before this, and I played both of them, so I already knew that enemy. Yeah.
So I hadn't fought that enemy at all, and I was just like, what the hell is this thing doesn't die? And then I was like, okay, I'll use invisibility, and I'll go in there and just like one-shot it. So it's just it's a matter of like, you really do learn the patterns for all the enemies in that dungeon. Like you basically start challenging yourself. Let's see how fast I can clear this group of enemies so that I can get out of here as fast as possible, because I'm so tired of it.
That's the type of challenge that would make me bump the difficulty to normal. It's
Yeah,
like
so
this is
you just wanted to power through.
Annoying.
Yeah. You just wanted to power through and not have to deal with it.
And sometimes I think that game actually really shines when it makes you feel powerful.
Yeah.
Don't feel bad about bumping it down, I guess.
So what I ended up doing was I just figured out what are the cheesiest combos that I can do with the superpowers that I have available to myself. And basically I came up with the best possible ways to be invincible for as long as possible. And I would just, I would just like power through. So I would go like, okay, Gemma has a power up, which basically makes you invincible and unflinchable for however long his power up lasts. So I go, Gemma, Hanabi. So that gives me damage and a bunch of invincibility. Go in there, just nuke everything as fast as I possibly can to just burn it down. As soon as that is done, I swap over and I do hypervelocity, which you're basically invincible while you're doing it too, because you're going faster than anything else. Yeah. And then when that is done, usually I'll be brain drive. And in brain drive, I'm regenning, so I'm not taking that much damage anyway. And by the time brain drive ends, I can use Gemma again. And then by the time Gemma ends, I'll pop brain field. And I was just like, I was chaining all of these things together just so that I could ignore mechanics, because some of the bosses, because of the camera control, were so annoying that I'm just gonna be like, I'm just gonna ignore mechanics. I'm just gonna do all of these crazy superpowers, make myself invincible, and destroy everything.
No, but I think that's what's satisfying about that combat too.
Yeah,
I don't consider that cheesing at all. But you did touch on a subject that kind of bothers me, which is the combos. So like as you mentioned, like your teammates have specific abilities, like Genma can make you invincible, Hanabi can give you fire powers, and there's like a bunch of them. You cannot activate two of them at the same time. You can only activate one of them until you unlock a skill in the talent that allows you to activate two at the same time. And that's like such a big game changer.
Yep.
That I just don't understand how that stuff is locked, you know? Like combat completely changed for me as soon as I got that talent. Like it became so much better. Like you were able to, just think about that. You're able to combine two like very different effects that your teammates have at your will. Like the combinations that you have can just vary in crazy ways depending on the situation you are. And that is like one talent that is just hidden away at the talent tree. It's crazy the stuff that they lock behind the talent tree. I mean, I don't think they should have that from the get-go for sure. Like I think that would be confusing, but like make that a story unlockable.
Yeah, the same way
you
that
can go the whole game without having it.
Yeah, the same way that you unlock like brain drive, you should eventually unlock the dual SAS for sure.
Exactly. And then make a talent for quadruple SAS if you want to, but yeah, I've never used quadruple, by the way.
Yeah, me neither. I was just like, that would be crazy. That would be too many things for me to even consider.
And I have it on Kasane. I just never used it.
And here's the other thing. Like, so I played a lot with Yuito, and I did play a little bit of Kasane. And this was very early on. So like I was 8 hours in with Yuito, and I did a stream where I just played Kasane. And I did not like playing Kasane.
Okay. She plays very different. Yeah.
But it's not that it's just different. Like I felt that I couldn't hit. For instance, I wasn't hitting enough because Kasane's attacks are like AoE, almost all of them. And I felt like I wasn't hitting enough to regen enough psychokinesis to do the throws. So I would end up just like stuck doing basic attacks because I couldn't combo the throws in because I would instantly run out of juice. Side juice or whatever.
Her strong attack also has her do a step back, and like then you can't regenerate anymore. That's interesting. So I didn't consider that at all actually, because when I played Kasane, it was New Game Plus, which meant I had all the talent points that I could want. Kasane's combat is really awesome, but again, the talent tree locks the fun of that combat. Kasane has so many options in the air. Like Kasane just spends all her time doing air combos and air juggles. It's so cool. But like, yeah, all that stuff
at the start, I was like, dude, Kasane sucks. Like, I really don't like playing Kasane at the start. It's just not fun. And it was the worst thing because I had literally just played Yuito, and I had the combo in my mind, which was like, okay, I go 1, 2, 3 and throw. And Kasane was like 1, 2, 3 and nothing. 1, 2, 3 and nothing. And only like at the third time I'd be like, okay, I can do another throw. Yay. So like I think they might need to balance the early combat of Kasane a little bit. Not even balance just because it's not powerful, but balance it because it's not fun. At least I didn't think it was fun at all. It was very hard.
I can see that for sure. Yeah.
To play
I'm having
her
fun now,
start.
but like, yeah. She doesn't have as many ground options as Yuito. I kind of like that though. Like Yuito likes to stay on the ground. When he goes into the air, his options are kind of limited, and Kasane is the other way around. Like Kasane likes being in the air, likes juggling, likes doing all sorts of crazy stuff. I like that both of them feel very different gameplay wise. Like their talent trees differ slightly also, so your progression is also slightly different too. And yeah, just like the basic melee buttons from Kasane and Yurito are completely different, which is gonna make you play them completely different. I didn't consider that about Kasane, honestly, that her combat would be kind of boring at the start, but yeah, looking back, I think Yurito's combat was also boring at the start.
Yeah, but it was. I don't think it was hard to use. Nearly as bad. Like,
yeah. No, that talent tree locks the fun combat. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about. So we've talked about boss fights, and there are some boss fights in particular that I took issue with, and they are the humanoid boss fights. I just think they're bad.
You cannot go through that encounter without taking damage.
No, I'm not talking about that specific encounter we talked about. I'm talking about just like all of them, all of the humanoid. Oh, okay. You're talking about all of them as well.
Yeah, no, the soldiers and stuff. Like, you cannot go through one of those encounters without taking damage. It feels like, yeah, I gotta tank bullets, and then I gotta get through them, and they don't have a stun meter, so it's. I don't know. It's just fodder.
But you're talking about like the basic, and I'm talking about boss fights, humanoid boss fights. Humanoid boss.
Yeah, it feels like they're bad at random times. Yeah, they're terrible. They're terrible, and there's so many of them. Like, imagine when you're fighting an enemy and you attack them, you expect the enemy to flinch. And sometimes this happens on a humanoid. You know, you're fighting someone with roughly the same powers as you. You attack them, you expect them to flinch, but they just randomly armor out of nowhere, and they attack you over it. And like, okay, now I'm like spending consumables because I just never know when he's gonna do it. And yeah, there are a few of those, and I didn't enjoy any of them except for one, maybe. Like, there was. And
yeah, the humanoid boss fights, I feel like, are a real problem. And not only that, but then there's also scripted humanoid boss fights where you think you're supposed to be fighting, but you're not. Your main objective is to just survive. And it's like, I always thought that those were weird because you're like, okay, I'm gonna try to find every opening to attack, and it's like, no, listen, don't do anything in this particular fight. Just run and survive. Particularly like on hard, because on hard, a lot of those fights, they'll just one-shot you. You're just going through, and you'll just like, boom, done, dead. And you're like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what the hell?
You don't stand a chance. You really don't. Like, imagine you're a level 20 and the boss is a level 50. Okay, you're supposed to die here. And there's no chance. Even on New Game Plus, where you keep your level, and all the enemies reset their levels to 0, by the way. Like, you're just an over-leveled guy killing everything in one shot and not getting any experience for a game that's designed to be played twice. That's really bad.
Yeah, that's weird.
But like, I got to the first boss fight that's like that, and the opponent is level 50, and when you first get there, you're like level 15, 20. But now here I am. You're level 50, but I'm level 60, bitch. I'm gonna take you down. Nah, the guy just has like 2 million health. It's impossible.
And if cheats. It feels bad when they do that, because you're attacking the enemy and you're like, I'm dealing no damage. Like, I'm clearly doing something wrong, but the game doesn't give you the tools to realize you're doing something wrong until you eventually survive long enough that the game's like, oh, by the way, this was all scripted and now there's a cutscene, and you're like, oh, really? Okay, fine.
Yeah. There is a moment with a really tough boss fight
that you can
actually beat it. Yeah, and it gives you a different cutscene if you do. So yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, that
happened
boss
once.
Fight. That boss
happened
fight
once and made me paranoid for the rest. Yeah. That happened once and it made me paranoid for the rest of my playthrough, because I'm like, okay, but what if I win this fight? What if I had won that? Would that have been different? Let me go back to my save. And like, I spent a lot of time doing that. A lot of time. The 25 hours were like in-game clock, but like playtime was probably closer to 30, because I was always rolling back my save to just check on that stuff.
To check to see if you could like beat a boss or
but
something.
No, it only happened once. It's like chapter 2 or whatever. It's like the only time that it happens.
Yeah, but I really wish that they had done the humanoid boss fights better, because some of those I feel like could be really cool, but they just end up feeling super unfair because the characters just end up doing stuff that you're just like,
yeah.
And then there was also like one boss fight near the end that annoyed me a little bit, because it just kept because your teammate's AI is not good enough to handle that boss on hard, and they just die and die and over and over, and you just like spend half of the boss fight just like rezzing your teammates. It's just like, Jesus Christ. Okay.
You could just not have teammates if you want. You just go into your party and say, no one. Just go to the bench, let me use your powers.
And is there like a positive aspect to that?
I don't think so.
Exactly.
Sometimes when I'm doing side missions and like you need to kill enemies in certain ways, I do it so they don't kill my enemies accidentally. But other than that, I don't think so.
Yeah. Side missions was another thing that I don't know if they changed it, but initially when I started playing, I couldn't see them marked on the maps because you have to go to like places that are not combat zones, and these side missions were not marked on the map. So you would have to like run through the map looking for the side missions.
The side missions, accepting the side missions is marked on the map. You can open the map and see where the side missions are.
Then I didn't see it the first time, but second time I saw it.
Yeah.
I thought
if you
that
track them
changed
like
it.
they don't point you to the right place.
Yeah.
The tracking does absolutely nothing.
It lets you know when you finish it, but then again, one of your NPC companions will also tell, hey, we completed that objective. And you're like, okay, great.
Cool. What I like the most about side missions, by the way, is that you can complete them in a menu. You don't have to go back to the quest giver. That's my favorite part. Everything else sucks about side missions. The rewards suck. The what do you do in the missions? Like, look, side missions have no narrative value. And they're basically, hey, go kill this enemy in this specific way. Let's say, for instance, you need to kill 2 Wither Sabat with a Brain Crush, which is that cinematic finisher. And you're like, okay, I'll probably run into some Wither Sabats while playing story mode.
No, you won't.
Nope. The side missions are always for enemies in areas that you've already been in. So, like, you need to go back to areas and find them. You will find other Sabat-type enemies during your playthrough, but that one specifically, nah, you gotta backtrack. You gotta backtrack, you gotta go there, you gotta kill that guy on purpose.
What if I told you that one of the early areas, there's a location with 9 Wither Sabats?
Perfect. But you don't get your side quests before you go there. That's the thing, like the game has you play a story, you go to a new area, you play the story in that area, and then you have the standby phase, the break between chapters, and the game's like, here's some side missions for enemies in the area that you were just in. We're not going to give you enemies for the area you're going to next.
Yeah.
We're going to make you backtrack. Like, fuck side missions. They're bad.
Yeah, I got to a point in the game where it's like, okay, I'm just not going to do side missions unless they reward a weapon. If they reward a weapon, sure, I'll go out of my way to do a side mission. But other than that, I was just like, nope. But that's the good thing about it. You don't have to feel guilty about not doing them.
Most weapons, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like, you can also craft most weapons. So, and I didn't feel like they were hard to craft at all.
No, dude. There's one specific material that, fuck that material. It was Battle Record A. I saw every monster that dropped that killed them like 1,000,000 times, and I was always starved for it. And I was...
do you have Tsugumi Bond 6?
No.
Tsugumi Bond 6 guarantees item drops.
Okay. I thought it... Yeah. I think it's weird that I don't have that bond, because like I picked up everything, and I think Tsugumi in particular, I gave her like all the presents that you could. And I still didn't get her to 6. I think I only got her to 5.
Yeah, the last one gives that perk, which is pretty good for hunting down that kind of stuff.
Yeah, some of the stuff was, but I think that was the only thing that was super rare. Most of the other stuff I was able to get just fine. It wasn't really super problematic. But speaking, while we're on the topic of presents, I thought this game does presents better than any other JRPG that I've ever played.
Yeah. It's super obvious what you need to get to craft any gifts. It tells you like which characters you've given that gift to. It tells you which characters are going to like that gift. And the gifts then show up in your actual hideout. And not only like are they objects that are used for decoration, you see characters interacting with them very often as well. Like it changes the routine and the idle animation of the characters in your hideout. According to the gifts that you've given them. Sometimes they're interacting with each other. There are like a couple of guys that like gaming, and if you give them a console, you'll see both of them playing. Like that's just a small example. But yeah, gifts are cool.
I thought it was really cool the first time that I gave a drone to Luca, and Luca's just like playing with the drone in the hideout, just like going up and down. And you actually see the drone in the hideout. I was like, okay, that is cool. And yeah, the console thing. I was surprised when I gave a console to Arashi, and then Kagero was there just like playing games with her, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Just like random character interactions that way, I thought was really well done. So overall, I think that there's a lot of good with the game, and I think it's definitely one of the more interesting games that we've seen come out of the development team of Bandai Namco Studios, I feel. Because like we've seen Code Vein, we've seen God Eater 3, and you know, I think Code Vein was actually pretty good, but it still had a couple of things missing. God Eater 3, I also had a couple of issues with. Scarlet Nexus, though, I think is like a really good step forward, and it shows that they're beginning, it almost feels like they're finally beginning to master the Unreal Engine in a lot of ways.
Interesting. Didn't think of it that way, but yeah.
Because like they only started, it was that Gamescom that we were at where they were like starting to really use the Unreal Engine more. Remember, was the Gamescom where you and me, we played like Fatal Bullet. They were talking about, oh, we're starting to use the Unreal Engine for the Sword Art Online games and whatnot. And that's, I felt like, where they were beginning to start to use the Unreal Engine. And Scarlet Nexus feels like, okay, now they know what they're doing with this engine. And probably future games are going to feel a lot better from Bandai Namco Studios.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a game that if you vibe with the story, then yeah, it's going to carry a lot of it for you. Yeah, it's going to definitely be worth it. And gameplay's fine. Like I harp on it a little bit. Like I say, combat is locked behind the talent tree, and enemies don't really challenge you in interesting ways. But like even with all that stuff, combat can definitely be satisfying, and I think it's a good combat system. Again, it's just like maybe the enemies could be a bit less repetitive, could challenge you in more unique ways. There are a couple that do. Like there's a bug that moves really fast, and you gotta activate hypervelocity to catch up to the bug. For instance, like that kind of stuff. That more unique enemies like that would definitely be appreciated. But unfortunately, like you fight the same way at the start of the game and at the end of the game, and it all sort of works. Like you'll have more options because you unlock more stuff in the talent tree, but the same stuff will work at the end there. So yeah, it's got some pacing issues according to most reviews. The story keeps getting in the way of the gameplay. I appreciated every time the gameplay was interrupted by a cutscene because I was just that invested.
Yeah. I thought that particularly the main plot, I think it's pretty good. I just wish that they had toned down a little bit on the bonding episodes near the end. And those two last dungeons like really overstay their welcome, like by a launch.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you don't need to do this. It's almost like we need to justify. It's that notion that people have a lot of times where it's like, okay, this game needs to be worth at least 1 hour for every $1 that I spent or something like that, you know? And I'm just like, you don't need, in my opinion, you don't need to do that. It doesn't need to be $1 for every hour spent. Like,
yeah. That said, we're talking about a 2-hour dungeon in a 25-hour or 30-hour playthrough.
35-hour playthrough.
Wow. Most of it is not padded. Like this is not a game with a lot of padding. Definitely.
Yeah. My biggest thing that I would point out to people is like there is a surprising amount of JRPG cutscenes. So like if you see the combat and you're like, oh man, this combat looks amazing, I just want to do this combat all the time, just be aware that 60 to 70% of the game is not that.
I guess that's what the reviewers of other outlets expected.
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't in it for the
story.
JRPG stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I think it's still a pretty good game. Again, it's all depending on the things that you like or don't like. But yeah, that's Scarlet Nexus, everyone. Thank you all very much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to hit it up with a like. If you did not enjoy it, dislike feedback is important. Make sure to check out Globku. There's going to be links in the description to all of his stuff. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.
Bye.